Hey everybody, welcome to week number 6. This week you're looking at a couple of interesting concepts. One of them is the cross-community collaboration, knowledge processes, and the other one goes back to that old adage that knowledge is power. And so we'll talk a little bit about both of these. But first I just want to talk about this cross-community collaboration and why that is important today in terms of knowledge management. And we have to go back and briefly talk about the concept we learned about last week, which was communities of practice. So now we have the ideas of community of practice and cross-community. Now remember, community of practice is involving a group of individuals who have some level of common knowledge, overlapping values, a shared sense of identity, and a high level of trust, which often leads to knowledge sharing. So communities of practice can occur within the organization itself. Remember, one of the issues with communities of practice is that they may fall outside of the organizational chart. You may not see that group there. And so it may not necessarily be an ad hoc group, but it is something that's not recognized in the organizational chart. So for example, when I was police chief, the Police Management Association, which represented positions of sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and the Police Association, which represented police officers and police detectives, they were interested in developing an alternate work schedule than what we currently had at the time. They were interested in going from a 410 schedule to a 312 schedule. So that was a group that was a community of practice. They had a common knowledge about the organization, the work environment, overlapping values in terms of what they wanted out of this community of practice, shared sense of identity in terms of their occupation, and there's a high level of trust. I mean, people were sharing their ideas, thoughts, and all the things necessary to try to promote this agenda of changing the work schedule. So that's an example of communities of practice. Now this week you're going to be learning about cross-community. Now cross-community involves individuals who have less common knowledge. There's a weak sense of shared identity or a distinctly separate identity. They have a different value system and perhaps even less trust. So some of the examples that the textbook talks about would be where maybe a company in the United States is collaborating with a company in England, and together they're working on the same project. But the problem is that they really don't know each other. They may not share the common knowledge, or at least to the point that you don't know what that knowledge of the other group of people might be. They don't have a shared sense of identity because they work for different companies. They may have a different value system merely because of who they are and where they live. And obviously there's that level of trust that has to develop, okay? Now the trust is going to come into play in a couple of different ways. Number one is the trust that develops based on somebody's knowledge. So in other words, as you begin working with individuals, you begin to realize that they do possess the specific knowledge level that you think is important. And so that's one of the things that you're able to work with. Once you develop that idea that these people are in fact very knowledgeable, then that level of lack of trust begins to diminish, okay? And there's that level of competency that also comes into place. So cross-community, the way I can maybe apply it to the law enforcement arena is maybe for whatever reason, your organization has got to develop a relationship with the community in terms of developing effective strategies for policing. Maybe it's It's something that has to do with maybe use of force, or maybe it has something to do with developing a more transparent organization. So anytime you're going to bring, for example, police together and the community together, there's always going to be that level of a lack of common knowledge. Police officers work in the field, have a different perspective as to how they behave than perhaps the community in terms of, well, why did you have to do that? And those type of things. They may not share the same sense of identity, or that identity is going to be distinctly separate. So you have people whose job it is to enforce the law, and maybe a group of people who are trying to better understand how the police enforce the law and how together they might be able to work together to maybe diminish some level of community distrust. Different value system, and obviously less trust. So whenever you have interaction between the police and the community, especially if it's some type of joint, I don't necessarily want to say task force, but some type of committee that's been developed to address a particular issue within the community, you can look at this as a level of cross-community. And so in order for these two groups, the police and the community, to become more effective in terms of this issue that they need to resolve, they're going to have to develop that level of trust. Because once you increase and have that level of trust, then that's going to increase or lead to more knowledge sharing. And businesses do the same thing. So again, if you're collaborating with a different company, but your common goal is to develop this project, you're going to have to develop trust, and then that trust is going to lead to sharing of knowledge. And so those are things that come into play when you're talking about this cross community, right? So communities of practice, not too difficult in terms of sharing knowledge, because you already have that level of trust that exists, versus this cross community where that trust is not there. All right. So for example, if you watch Survivor, as soon as the groups merge, there's that level of distrust, because you have people coming from one tribe and people from another tribe, and now they're merging together. And absent the people that you've been collaborating with, that level of trust just isn't there. And so Survivor, as in any other type of cross-community collaboration, you need to work on developing that trust. And once you develop that trust is going to lead to knowledge sharing. And that knowledge sharing, more often than not, is going to come in the shape of tacit knowledge. So people are going to begin to open up, share their ideas willingly as this particular project or whatever the specific issue is that's being promoted. Okay, so that's important to understand about the differences between communities of practice and cross-community, right? So that's basically what they're talking about there. And again, the book talks about an example of different companies. One's in Taiwan and one's someplace else, maybe China, and they have to work together to develop, some project. Okay. Difficulties in cross-cultural knowledge sharing. Again, the issue of identity. People from different parts of the same organization may have a weak sense of a common identity. So, even within the same organization, depending on how large it is, there may be a weak sense of common identity. All right. So, if you're a large organization and you've got different substations or different precincts, that may exist, where you're going to have to develop a sense of trust with those individuals who are coming to work, that you have to collaborate with, that come from a different part of the same organization. So you're going to have to work with those folks. Even if, for example, if you're working on a project in your city involving police and maybe elements at City Hall, they all work for the same organization, the City of Riverside, for example. But they don't have a common identity, because you got police, you got people that maybe work in the IT department, you got finance people. There is a lack of common identity. So you may not have that sense of free flowing of ideas and sharing of that tacit knowledge. So this is going to complicate knowledge. And also, the difficulty is we are all socialized differently. All right. Let's face it, police officers come and have a police subculture. We have a different way a different worldview, a different way of looking at things. People that come from finance have a different way of looking at things or socialize differently. People within City Hall administration have a different way of looking at things. So part of the difficulties in cross-cultural knowledge sharing is this identity. So we need to somehow resolve the issue of identity and work towards reducing or mitigating the differences so that we can have a more open dialogue in terms of knowledge sharing and ability to solve whatever the specific problems might be. The other thing is knowledge. There may be a lack of a common knowledge. Tacitness and context specificity make transferability difficult. So your knowledge and putting it in the context of whatever that problem is may be difficult, okay? Because you have knowledge related to one element of the city and other departments have knowledge related to another element of the city. The knowledge is there. The problem is, how do you make that transferable so that everyone can appreciate the knowledge that each of us possesses as we attempt to solve the different specific problems that the organization may be facing. The other thing is epistemic, and basically we all have different values and worldviews, and those can apply to our knowledge. We have different experiences, and so all of these things are going to come into play. So when we're talking about the difficulties in cross-cultural learning and knowledge sharing, we have to focus on the issue of identity, the fact that we're dealing with a lot of different people, and the level of knowledge that we all have about whatever the specific issue is that we're trying to resolve. Each member of the group has specific knowledge, and that could be tacit or explicit, but again, trying to share that in an open forum where knowledge is openly shared. There has to be that level of trust that has to exist for people to share that knowledge. Next, we're going to talk about power. This idea of power is knowledge. And the book defines power as a scarce resource whose use allows people to shape the behavior of others. And that's what tacit knowledge, that's what power is. The book's going to talk about different types of power: reward power, coercive power, legitimate power, reference power, and expert power. And all of this, if you've taken any courses in organizational management or management courses, you're very familiar with all of these. So you can take a look at these and apply them to your organization. You probably have some own personal examples of how each of these might apply to you. So go ahead and take a look at those. And those again are reward, coercive, legitimate, reference, and expert power. Now, I just want to spend a few minutes talking about expert power because I have a couple of examples that will help in terms of this knowledge versus power element. But I'm going to run out of time here, so I'm going to stop, and then I'm going to pick this lecture up here again in a few minutes, okay? So just hang loose, and I will see you guys in just a sec. Hold on.